So looks like we are live. Hello, I am Ekta Raghuvanshi. I am the South Asia analyst for RANE, and I have with me my colleague who covers the entire African continent, which is huge in itself, Clara. Today we will talk about food inflation in both the regions, which actually it's a global problem, but both the regions and related political instability and unrest in both our regions of interest. So, hello everybody. Hi, Clara.
Hi, Ekta. How are you?
Hi, good to see you again.
You too.
I might as well start with some of the countries in South Asia. Of course, the biggest news taker is Sri Lanka these days because of the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. It's all because of the reasons that happened in 2019 and the economic management that mismanagement that happened in 2019. However, the current geopolitical crisis driven by the Russian war in Ukraine and the blockage of grains exports from Ukraine, which is a huge region for the entire world, if you look at it like that. That has caused prices of everything, fuel, food commodities to go really high for countries like Sri Lanka who are heavily import dependent. Of course, Sri Lanka is also bearing the brunt of it now, and along with all the problems that is having, there is a very likely possible food shortage or food insecurity problems that would happen in the coming months, I think so.
Hmm.
We can also talk about maybe Pakistan is also in the same boat, I would say, because it imported most of its wheat from the Russia Ukraine region. That import is now facing obstacles and things like that. Of course, Afghanistan is a very different issue. It has a huge hunger, food insecurity problem that has been, but due to mostly geopolitical issues, due to Taliban's ruling and other issues. We both have talked about this. We will touch on the climate change issue and how it affects food security everywhere.
Hmm.
But just briefly, I know you cannot cover everything in Africa, but are there any countries in Africa currently who have similar issues?
Yes, I mean it's such a widespread issue that, especially for developing nations, much of the world,
Mhm.
but particularly in Africa, we see it across the continent. And Nigeria is one place where, you know, food insecurity, fuel shortages, these price hikes that you were just mentioning, are likely to have political ramifications.
Yeah.
So we have elections coming up in Nigeria in February of 2023, and politicians. Nigeria has a long history of tumultuous elections, and so we're watching a lot as we head into that electoral season. But in terms of both food and fuel insecurity, fuel shortages are of particular concern, because
Mhm.
Nigeria imports the vast majority of its refined products, although it's a net crude exporter.
Explorer, right?
It imports 90 to 95% of its refined products because of lack of refining capacity, which is a key issue that candidates are attempting to address, as
Mhm.
they campaign. But those longstanding problems that Nigeria has faced in terms of developing its refining capacity, are deeply embedded. And so although politicians are making promises, Nigerians are skeptical, understandably. And then food insecurity is another problem that is on the rise. So we've had, actually, in West Africa, the planting season looks better than in East Africa, which I'll touch on in a minute. But for the next 12 to 18 months, we can expect to see a continuation of the food shortages, in terms of basic staples. So it's everyday household goods like rice and yams and millet,
Mm.
and which of course is exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So, and also fertilizer shortages. So all of these issues, are so connected and in interplay, and the result is growing consumer hardship. And so the question is that, or one of the questions I should say, is how that consumer hardship will manifest in terms of its political implications. And growing unrest is a theme that I think we can expect to see throughout sub-Saharan Africa.
Mhm.
We've seen quite a bit concentrated over the last year, particularly in West Africa, throughout the region,
Yeah.
with several coups and coup attempts. And so, in places that face insurgencies or that have, military regimes in power, like Mali, like Guinea, like Burkina Faso, and then in places with historically fragile governments, like
Mhm.
Niger, maybe Cote d'Ivoire, we could see. Increasing discontent that then results in resistance to the government. So yeah, do any of these things resonate in Southeast Asia, in your region?
Oh yeah, yeah. Of
Yeah.
course, not if you exclude Afghanistan, there's no military coup in
Right.
any of the South Asian countries as of now. But yes, in Pakistan, I don't know. We've discussed a lot about Pakistan's political crisis in the past few months. How the former prime minister was how Imran Khan was it? Yes, yes.
Mm.
How the prime minister had to give up his post and he was ousted because of the economic crisis in the country, because of inflation being a major part in opposition to him. Now we have a new government that is dealing with negotiating with the IMF. It
Mm-hmm.
has to work with the IMF, and for satisfying IMF's requirements, the government has in fact taken a number of strict steps, which are very unpopular. They
Mm-hmm.
have increased fuel prices more than 50%, I think. Now they just did a price hike 2 days ago again, so it was like three price hikes in a row in like a span of 2 weeks. Pakistan is not used to that. However, fuel subsidies have been very important for governments to remain in power in
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan. So there is a very real risk if the fuel prices, given again with the food shortages, and there are possibilities of power there's a possibility of power crisis in Pakistan also. All these factors combining,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very real possibility that a very fragile coalition government in Pakistan could very well fall if some of the coalition members are just not in favor of increasing fuel prices and they do not agree with the government. So yes, I think Pakistan is a big one in that. Second, I would say Sri Lanka also falls in that boat. We have a new government. We still have the president who people are demanding to resign, but he has not yet. He has installed a new prime minister who is favored in most of the opposition parties, who's like this neutral candidate who he thinks can tide things over. However, also everything depends on the IMF, in with Sri Lanka's case also. So IMF is big. Currently, IMF lending program is big in South Asia, for these two countries especially. Uh, I think the governments have no really real options but to accept IMF's conditions to implement austerity measures, and just to tide over this crisis for a few months before things start looking better for these two countries especially.
Mm-hmm.
Bangladesh is placed in a better position than these two countries. However, with every passing day, there's a discussion in Bangladesh also about high import prices and how their forex reserves are depleting, and with a pace that they would not like it, right? So these are the discussions we have in all the countries in South Asia too. Uh, we might as well talk about climate change and how it has, because we also have climate change that we have to
Right.
deal with, right?
Yeah.
In South Asia, especially in Pakistan, in India, we had a very brutal heat wave. Like it I think it crossed all records and things like that. It broke records. And it also affected the wheat growing season in India. Especially, you might have heard about India banning its not banning, but stopping its wheat exports,
Yes.
which was a huge concern for all the smaller countries in South Asia, because
Mm-hmm.
Bangladesh, being a very dependent country on India for wheat,
Right.
So things like that, and that then drove insecurity or discussions in Bangladesh about, oh my God, where will we get our wheat from? So things like that have been happening. I think wheat from India exports will. I think many countries in Africa also import wheat from India, right? And the
There are
wheat ban
several, yes.
also. Yeah, yeah, the wheat ban from India would also affect them,
Right. And
compounded by all the other crises.
compounded
Yeah,
by Ukraine. Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
What do you say about how climate change has been affecting certain crops or maybe planting season in Africa or certain important
Yes.
countries where maybe some of them are exporters also?
Yes, I mean, there isn't a region or a country that will be untouched by climate change,
Yeah.
right? Increasing desertification, the Sahel and Greater Sahara Desert encroaching further and further south into sub-Saharan Africa is of great concern. And there have been initiatives planned to build a barrier of trees. Those have not come to fruition in their totality. But in terms of particularly troubling hotspots that we see currently where climate change is having an impact, East Africa is top of that list. So right now we have one of the worst droughts in Kenya, Somalia, and the Horn in 40 years. And that is manifesting, on top of, as we've mentioned several times, the wheat shortage coming out of
Mm.
Russia, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Sudan, Egypt are huge importers of
Yeah.
Eastern European wheat, and so then on top of the drought and the disrupted planting season, we're looking at millions that are food insecure currently, and the UN has recently warned of an impending famine in Somalia. So those that directly dovetails with what we were just discussing is food insecurity brought on by increasing protectionist measures, brought on by price hikes. Then there's the foundational issue of sub-Saharan African states potentially not being able to produce what in some cases little food they did even before this crisis. So
Mm.
all of these issues are compounding one another. In Somalia, we have a new president. They very excitingly held elections recently after several delays, and that president faces myriad obstacles. One of which is Al Shabaab, the insurgency group that's been present in the country for decades and holds vast swaths of territory. And one of the problems that the new president is running into now is the new president, as in addition to the international community that's been involved in Somalia also for decades, and which the Somali people depend on for food aid, is now that there's this truly dire drought coinciding with the food shortage, is how to get food aid to people in territories controlled by Al-Shabaab. So
Mm.
this is one example of how issues coalesce.
Yeah.
Conflict, climate change, political instability, macroeconomic issues you were just mentioning with the IMF, all coalesce into a potentially humanitarian catastrophe that we're looking at emerging over the next 6 to 8 months, or even a shorter runway than that. And then in less extreme circumstances, in Kenya, we also are coming up to elections. So Kenya has had a history of particularly tumultuous electoral seasons, and I don't need to get into the details of the risks there, but in relation to what we're talking about today, the fuel shortages, food shortages, increasing prices, the drought that's going on, all of those things are, make the country very vulnerable, I will say, to incitement of violence, and that could come from politicians, that could come from gangs, that could come from all manner of sources. But yeah, the vulnerability there caused by reduced purchasing power and consumer control makes the country particularly vulnerable.
It does, it does. You've mentioned Al Shabaab. Are there? I really don't know much about Africa, but do you think there are other groups in other different countries who can take advantage of this situation or political crisis?
Certainly, yes. So Al Shabaab is one. There have been
Mm,
reports that the group is controlling water access points, and then occasionally there are reports that that Al Shabaab will commandeer aid convoys. So
mm,
that's of concern. And then, in the Sahel, we have numerous jihadist extremist groups that are also likely to continue to exploit. This isn't a new trend, but continue to exploit uh, locals' vulnerability to food shortages. In addition to, these groups are becoming increasingly adept at exploiting the lack of state control or
yeah.
state services that extend to these peripheral regions, and that's certainly a recruitment tactic and also a point that's repeatedly exploited. How about you in South Asia? Are there any insurgencies that you think could benefit or capitalize
No,
on these
no, not
phenomena?
not directly. Of
Yeah,
course, that comes excluding Afghanistan.
sure.
But we might as well give some time to Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, since Taliban took over in 2021, their economic situation has not improved whatsoever. There are multiple sanctions on the Taliban leaders who are currently in the Taliban-led government, and it has not been recognized by any of the countries internationally, so it has no international recognitions, and hosts of obstacles and problems come with that itself.
Right.
Taliban's the Afghan bank, which was before, its money has been blocked in the US by multilateral institutions. It is heavily only dependent on international aid, on humanitarian aid, to be very clear. However, I have been day in and day out. There are reports of huge queues of people in places like even Kabul, the capital city of the capital of Afghanistan, where people are just standing in line to get one loaf of bread. So
Mm,
food insecurity, hunger, even malnourishment in children is huge. Even before the Taliban took over, the situation was not good there because there was a very bad drought in Afghanistan. I might get this wrong, but maybe at the end of 2021, or at the end of 2020, or in the beginning of 2021.
mhm,
So that has just exacerbated things for Afghanistan, now for Taliban itself. So we also have been talking about not insurgency, but different domestic local militant groups in northeastern part of Afghanistan, who are actually the resistance force, or other groups who are currently fighting in Afghanistan with the Taliban. So
mhm,
we could see more things like that. Those local warlords who were before the Taliban took over, before there was this U.S.-led government for 20 years. Afghanistan actually was very fragmented with different ethnic groups, right? So if the situation with the food insecurity keeps exacerbating on top of everything that's happening, and if the social conditions there do not improve, the social restrictions on women and things like that, if that do not improve, there is this window for these local warlords to actually put out some form of resistance to Taliban, and there we could see some form of sporadic violence here and there, and even fighting in different regions at the same time in Afghanistan. So
mm,
Afghanistan still remains a big risk in the region, of course, and the risk of that violence spilling over is a whole different topic. But that it all comes with that, right?
mhm,
In Sri Lanka, there are people I have heard, because of the current crisis, they've been wanting to either move to India, or they've been trying to look for alternatives, which I do not think we would not see a great migration of sorts. But the problems there are also huge. I mean, just people have been waiting for food lines or for fuel lines for days together,
Yeah.
and dying in lines like that, although those numbers are very very small. But that's been happening. So situation in all the countries, due to one or the one common factor I see is only the Ukraine crisis and the price rises in international commodities. However, all these countries have their own sets of problems that started even before the Ukraine-Russia crisis,
Right.
uh, but now have been just exacerbated. And I do not see political leaders having the strength, the unity to deal with them all at once, because these systems are already so fragile. And
Hmm.
especially in Pakistan, the democratic system is comparatively new. It's not very well established. In India, let's talk about India. In India, the price rises have not really resulted in protests on the streets as of now. However, we know that the current government, ruled by the BJP or the Bharatiya Janata Party, is very very famous, as in it has the majority of votes, majority of the population is behind them. I do not see it happening very soon in India also. However, you don't know if the government decides to not take on the subsidy of fuel on themselves and just pass on the prices of whatever they import to the consumers. it,
Hmm.
it could we could see uh, some form of protest or unrest
Hmm.
in some sections of
And
the country also.
can I ask you a question? Do you
Yeah.
see India implementing further protectionist measures?
uh, Yeah, there is a very, I do not see protectionist like wheat, but there is a discussion about capping the exports of sugar
Mm,
in the coming season. So I think India's marketing season for exporting agricultural goods is October to September. So the
okay.
next season starts, because after the harvest and everything that happens, its season
Right.
is from October to September. That's its marketing season. And I now have heard reports about its thinking that it will cap sugar exports, so it will not completely ban them.
Hmm.
It will still, but I think the amount I've heard is 7 million tons or something like that. So people can export up to 7 million tons, and
Okay.
then after that it would stop. But I also know that uh, traditionally sugar exporting country is Brazil, right? And there's also a drought in Brazil. So there will be the cap on the cap on export from India will ultimately also affect the prices of sugar in the international market. That will
Ah,
lead to price rise and all sorts of other secondary problems that comes with it. So yes, I've heard about sugar. There was some discussion or some speculation about rice, but I do not think rice is currently in discussion. But
mm,
sugar very well after wheat. Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
So those are, anything else you would like to flag in regarding this
There
topic from
there
Africa?
is so much
I
here.
know.
We could be here all day, but I think I've covered a couple of the major notes.
So the major notes: the Ukraine crisis, political crisis in all the all the countries in Africa and
Well,
South Asia. Maybe the government stumbling because of
yeah,
the rising food and fuel inflation.
yeah, it'll be a tough 12 to 15 or 12 to 18 months, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
So
Well, thank you, Ekta.
thank you for joining me today. It was a
Thank
wonderful
you.
discussion, and I'm sure we'll be
Yeah,
discussing day in and day out about same issues in both the regions and in fact globally.
certainly.
For everybody who's joined us today, thank you so much. You can also get in-depth analysis of this topic and even dive into other geopolitical global topics with us at RANE Worldview. Subscribe today at rainworldview.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ekta. Bye.